For some reason, it's not working for me. And we'll get started as soon as it. Thank you very much.
It's on now.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I am thrilled to be able to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Bill Hazel. Dr. Hazel is Senior Deputy Director at the Claude Moore Charitable Foundation. The foundation, among other things, funds projects related to health workforce throughout the Commonwealth. Dr. Hazel completed his second term as Secretary of Health and Human Resources of the Commonwealth of Virginia in 2018, and then served as the Senior Advisor for Innovation and Community Engagement at George Mason University. He is a graduate of Princeton University with a degree in civil engineering and Duke University with a degree in medicine. Dr. Hazel has been active in many local, state, and national medical societies, most notably as president of the Virginia Medical Society and trustee of the American Medical Association. So with that, I'll turn the mic over to Dr. Hazel.
Thank you, Nancy. Good to see some familiar names and familiar faces. I won't say many new faces here, but faces nevertheless. Ripple, I need to ask you to let Shirley Basdar in. She's going to have a role in the presentation, and she's not able to get in if you can. But beside that, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It is said that anybody can learn from their own mistakes, but smart people learn from the mistakes of others. And as we talk about workforce, I want to share with you some of the learnings from other areas. Many of you know that I was secretary up until 4 years ago when I was paroled and put in the custody of George Mason, where I was served out the rest of my 2-year sentence. And I came over to the foundation 2 years ago. And the foundation was established in 1991 upon the death of Dr. Claude Moore. Dr. Moore was born in Southern Virginia, grew up outside of Roanoke, house with the dirt floor, and ended up going to medical school, serving in World War I in the medical corps, and then coming eventually into practice and doing well. But he was an eccentric guy, and he invested in a lot of real estate. And when he died, the foundation had a number of assets and pretty much open mission. And what they have focused on prior to my arrival were really a couple of things. One is efforts in Loudoun County, where Dr. Moore lived, and also on health workforce. And there was a program designed on the back of a napkin back in 2005 called Claude Moore Scholars. And the goal was to introduce kids to careers they might not be aware of in healthcare, and then work with high schools and community colleges so that upon graduation from high school, they could get a job. And hopefully that job could be a springboard to a career, higher education, or some combination of both. When I came along 2 years ago, I was asked to take a look at the program and what's working and what needed to be improved. And we found a lot of things that were challenging. And what is important about the journey that we were on to improve our program is I think it tracks very well with the journey that you all are on now as we look at the human resources workforce. I know back when I was secretary, we were alarmed by the rate of turnover of social workers, folks who would come out, get that first job, and then find out what they were taught and what they were told to expect didn't line up with what the job actually was and what they could and couldn't do. The wages were low. The tools were not necessarily in place, and there wasn't the career opportunity that a young person coming out of college might want. So, we see these in a number of professions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we learned about behavioral health. We did a study for the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services last year that looked at some of their issues. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the tech talent pipeline as well, which I think serves as a model for how you might think about organizing the workforce. Now, Leslie Bashan got me into this, and you all know Leslie. First of all, she speaks softly and is shy and retiring, and she has that Tennessee accent, and she told me without the benefit of an interpreter. So I may get my instructions wrong. But Leslie, does that sound like at the end of this time, it'd be a good, and hopefully that we've shared some ideas with you about how you can think about as an organization, organizing your efforts to really create good careers in human services that actually grow your workforce. Leslie, can you nod your head so that, okay, good. I see it. I don't hear it. That's a good sign.
It's always good when I'm muted, Doc.
All right, very good. But so I want to go through that with you a little bit. And at this point, I am going to share my screen. It takes a minute for the slides to load up as we do that. And so it'll come on in a second. Word is a little slow, or Teams is a little slow this way. But we do know we tried this earlier. And is Shirley Basdar on at this point?
I don't
No,
see
I
her.
cannot see her.
Okay, I don't know what's happening then. Ripple, are you getting the screen to load now?
Yes, it's already there. We can see
Oh.
your screen.
Okay, very good. So at Claude Moore, we have been working to support these kids coming into health careers. Now, imagine where it says health careers, we said human service careers. And imagine where we say Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services, we say the Department of Social Services as we go through this. But what we have attempted to do is to get the kids engaged and recognizing that there are limitations to what you can do in K-12. So our goal was to grow the program in health sciences, create units around the state, and then develop a sustained funding source. And I think this is a model that we could probably use. Claude Moore Scholars currently is in the areas in green around the state. Most mature programs are in Loudon, where the program started, but we have a very large program in the greater Roanoke area. We have a program with Ballad Healthcare out in Wise. The Southampton Roads Workforce Authority is a program that will include Isle of Wight, Chesterfield, and Isle of Wight, Chesapeake, and Portsmouth. Rappahannock Community College is here in Northern Neck and are in the Middle Peninsula, and so forth. Then we have Petersburg, and then we have programs in Chesterfield. When I came in, we recognized that if you went to a kid in ninth grade, first of all, it was a little late to think about career planning because the K-12 educational system already has some of the prerequisites for the science and courses that are needed in middle school. So you're needing to talk to middle school parents and middle school kids about career opportunities. And if you said, gee, we can teach you to be a nurse assistant or an entry-level job, the response is, well, that's not much of a career. So we realized that if we're going to attract people into the business, we have to think about a highway, if you will, a way to move people through and give them the vision of a career that works for a lifetime. And we also know from the tech talent system, we didn't like the idea of a pipeline where it implies you go in one end and come out the other, because most of us don't actually go through school that way or life that way. You get off for school and work, you get a little bit more training, you go back, you do something different. And the Virginia Economic Development Partnership has taken this concept of long life learning to heart, where you can't expect people to live to be 90 or 100 and do one thing your whole life. If for nothing else, your back wears out when you're young. We have looked at ways to create collaborations in regions, and we learned this a little bit from Go Virginia, but in the Blue Ridge area around Roanoke, we've created a coalition of educators, employers, economic developers. I think the key word here is employers, and as human service officials, I think you need to think about the employer role in the education and training. We know that education, without being overly critical, tends to do its own thing. And we have to be able to define very well what it is we need, how many of them we need, when we need them, and how you can mix the education into the workplace experience. And that takes some effort. In the Roanoke organization around healthcare, you can see a variety of employers. Carilion Clinic has played a major role. Lewis Gale is part of the HCA system. We have a number of the nursing homes that are centered there. And then Freedom First Enterprises as a fiscal agent. But we also have the school districts and the community colleges and the four-year institutions participating, which helps. And then as you think about this, and I think, again, think in terms of human services career, it's not going to be a lot different. You know, what do you need as employers, right? How do you take that to the academics and get them to teach what they need for their accreditation for their programs, but also what you need? How do you engage the students? How do you get the experiential learning? How do we know if we're being successful? Looking at the analytics and so forth, and then thinking in terms, of course, of how do we pay for all this, which we will come back to in a bit. In terms of the Roanoke project, Claude Moore has helped over time. We had funded the Virginia Western Community College for a number of years and found that that was supporting dual enrollment and not program building. So one of the delegates went to the General Assembly and got an appropriation to cover the dual enrollment costs. And then they were able to get some Go Virginia funding as well. So this is what we have learned from. Now, I mentioned the Tech Talent Initiative, and I think one of the unfortunate things is when there's a nice shiny ball, a new toy like Amazon that's bringing jobs, people think about, oh, gee, well, we can fund that. So if you look at this, the General Assembly allotted almost $1 billion over 20 years for expansion of degree programs, construction of facilities, and so forth to serve technology. Now we're competing with that in the health arena and in the human services arena. But it's important as we think about how we go to the state to say, well, wait, think about our workforce. Understand that the funding now for this is not the way they've done it before. It goes through economic development. It's annual. The universities are required to meet certain targets for enrollment and fundraising, and their performance-based agreements. How many of what are you going to turn out? So I think we can go to a university with a list of things that we need if the state is amenable to saying, all right, this is important to us. We also have to think about if this is the tech talent model, starting earlier in K-12 in the tech talent. I can tell you that in healthcare, we have done a 3-year agreement with the 4-H clubs, the extension service in Virginia. And they are developing a K-5 curriculum in a mobile platform that can go around and introduce people, kids and families, to the careers and excite them in the educational materials that are needed to be successful in a career. And you think about how you collaborate going up. Think about the same thing, human services workforce, if you will, early opportunities, and think about the learning opportunities, how we get the credentials to stack, how we use virtual learning, and think about career development. In our workforce pipeline, with the exception perhaps of the area health education centers, G3, Get Skilled, Get a Job, Give Back, is a way to get kids funded for careers. Virginia Ready, that is an initiative that actually I think was supported by Governor Youngkin's wife to support retraining efforts. Go Virginia, the business opportunity. And I think what we're seeing on the healthcare side and should see on the human services side is that business will not come to an area where we don't have workforce that is ready and able to work. And I think that the things that you do in human services help contribute to that. And there's greater recognition of the need as we go through. Change again, healthcare education to career education. There's certificates. You get a pathway to certificates for a license. Then we can go up to more advanced degrees and so forth. And these are the types of things that we have funded, but I see no reason why social work couldn't be part of that, why community health worker couldn't be part of that going forward, should we choose.
Hey, Doc, Shirley's on now.
Oh, well, I just did her part because I didn't know she was on.
Okay.
Sorry, Shirley. Are there any
Nope.
questions so far? Let me stop for a second. Leslie or anybody telling me that I'm way off the mark here.
So if anybody has questions, just put them in the chat. Let us know you're out there.
Okay. So in the meantime, and I think where there is a real opportunity here is so much of what you do is related to behavioral health. And we know that behavioral health workforce has risen to a crisis proportion in Virginia. We know that the state put hiring bonuses in the budget at the special session back in the summer to try to improve retention, and is interested in addressing salaries in the hospitals. They've been running about 1,000 people short in terms of the hospital-based workforce. And I've been told that the community service boards are running about 2,400 people short in their workforce. And that led us to talk to the commissioner, and we began to work on a project to help justify a state exercise to grow the behavioral health workforce. And first of all, it's complicated, but you know that lots of people are involved in it. And one of the things we have to realize in behavioral health, if we focus all on the hospitals and bonus there, who's going to lose their employees to the hospital system? And yeah, Leslie's got her hand up. That's an issue. So we have to think in a more broad-based way, and we have to articulate that, because I'm surprised that legislators tend to think at this point it's still one or the other and not both in an organized system. It's the multiple needs across Virginia. We clearly struggled with the substance use disorder. We know that we're still having issues getting tied down on the IDDD, and we know it's a state priority to get out from under the DOJ agreement. So having the workforce in place for that becomes important. And then there's the regular mental illness that we are addressing. Nationally, the workforce has been waning. It's not just in nursing, it's not just in behavioral health, but whether it's the increased needs, the compassion fatigue, all of these things on COVID plays into it, but all of this was in place before. So what we found is that there clearly needs to be an immediate intervention. And I think you have the same problem. I have heard that people in Loudoun, 14 people left Loudoun Family Services, and they may go to schools, they may go to another county. And that suggests the need not just to think about our own organization, but to think about the organizations around us. Otherwise, we're simply playing musical chairs, and we're not addressing the long-term transformational issues. And I think most of this group would understand the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of dealing with a very diverse population. And these are ways to attract people who wouldn't know of what we do to the services. I think a big piece of the of the behavioral health discussion was understanding the retention issues. The working conditions includes wages and benefits and safety, safety being a huge problem. I think things related to using evidence-based practice. Are you practicing to what is modern and appropriate and to the top of your capability? Are you restricted in some place? Is the role alignment between what I expected to do when I came to work for you and what I am actually doing, is it being met? Am I disappointed now? Are there scope of practice limitations? Again, we need to think, of course, about the career incentives. How do you bring people in, loan repayments and so forth? There's the building, the pipeline that we've talked about. And then there's thinking about how do you align what you're doing with what other agencies are doing. And again, I focus on behavioral health because I think when you hear from Secretary Littell later today, he is going to tell you that, or he's told me that behavioral health is a huge issue, and the state has an enormous responsibility in this. Unlike technology, where you have to line up your education for the things we're dealing with. The not only does the education have to line up and become efficient, but you have the government sets the rules of who can do what and how it's done and how it's paid for and how it's regulated. And unless the agencies, behavioral health, social services, aging and rehab, are lining up across to make things workable, it's going to be very difficult to train the people that we need. So here are the areas that we think would apply or be available for investment, I think, in your work as well as behavioral health. Leslie, any comments so far?
Your screen's not showing. Like I can see it. It's not big.
My screen?
Yeah. Do other people see the screen? See his screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yes, I
Yes, we
can
can
see
I
it.
can see it as well.
Okay, it's just me. It's just my problem.
I'm sorry, Leslie. We'll get you into that tech talent pipeline pretty soon.
Yeah, I don't know if they'll let me.
So,
Doc, what are the opportunities for partnership between some of the work Claude Moore's doing with their partners and local government?
yeah, let me come to that a little bit later. We can maybe have some discussion if you don't mind, Leslie, because I think that's really the end goal here. But I want to go through, so what Deloitte, who did this study, suggested behavioral health is that you can play two roles. One is designing the paths, right, for workforce development. The other is supporting the state effort. And this, put DSS in here, put your local organization, same things apply, I believe, across the gamut. Now, these are some of the tasks that we think have to be done. One, professionalizing the workforce, creating, at least at the early levels, the idea of respect for what you're doing. This is professional work. It is good work. You deserve the respect, or the profession deserves the respect. Medicaid is important in behavioral health. We do know that Medicaid can use administrative match to do some where Medicaid pays for services can be used to train to help with some of the teaching. We looking at the evidence-based practices. I hesitate to say you need a 10-year plan because you needed help yesterday, but you need both. Have to monitor our workforce. We have proposed a cross-agency entity, and I'm going to come to that in a little bit, that will do number 7, hopefully deal with number 8, and number 9, the Workforce Council. And so I think these are all things that can be done around human services workforce. I have a series of slides that gets into the details. Professionalism, the career ladders. And it can be lots of different things. And we know with burnout, maybe we have to think about how people work in teams and have different options. I've mentioned the evidence-based practices several times. The planning effort, this should speak for itself. We need to know where we are and what is needed. Predicting the future is always a bit challenging, especially when it's changing. But these are things that we need to be prepared for going forward. Of course, the analytics, and I'm going to skip through these pretty quickly, but you can have the slides. I wanted to do one quick comparison with nursing. This is a year-old document from Deloitte talking about nursing and nursing education that I think applies, but I would suspect that these disruptors are happening in your workforce. Technology, smartphones, how do you use them? The data, how do you use that? I think this nature of a career in terms of the half-life of skills is going to be a big thing as we go forward. The diversity clearly is a problem. So when you have all of these disruptors, it's going to create some changes. And then there's the change in what's expected. Nurses in hospitals used to be taking care of a patient at the bedside. Now it is a much broader continuum of things related to the patient experience and quality and safety and having input into the system. It requires a different level of training. And I think our people are going to expect this, particularly in the next generation. It takes a while in healthcare to make change in organizations. And I suspect that in government, it might even be slower. So we need to get going on this. What are we interested in seeing happen and plot the course to it? So this is something that you all are uniquely qualified to do. We think about the different opportunities for career advancement that can happen. It starts at the beginning, but you might go to the digital aspect. You might do research. You might stay a direct caregiver or a coach. So we can show a lot of different opportunities for students, for new graduates, millennials, mid-career, and so forth, if we can get it put together and market it. And it's important work, and we need people to do it. So I will pass that on to you. And that leaves for these non-traditional career paths that we have to enable with our partners in education. And I think healthcare is doing this. And again, this is a caring profession. I think a lot of this applies. I'm going to skip this for now and for this, but it gets there, mitigating the shortages, bridging experience gaps, and enhancing our effectiveness and demonstrating the results comes up. Now, Delegate Hodges has put in a bill at this General Assembly that came out of appropriations yesterday, 23-0, that would create a special advisor to the governor for health workforce development. And you read this, it is in collaboration with Health and Human Resources, Labor, Commerce, and Trade. The General Assembly trusts them to engage employers in the private sector. You can think about improving staff retention and build Virginia's health. Suppose that said Health and Human Services workforce. That's what Leslie wants me to do. Get that changed, and you can change that. But look down here, but including but not limited to behavioral health, nursing, and public health, a strategy to address the behavioral health safety net workforce shortage. Y'all have got say in that. And the question I think will be, as this goes through the budget process over the next 2 weeks, how you have say in it. And I have brought this to their attention. It also creates a fund. The fund has to be funded, but this fund would be the Health and Human Services Workforce Development Fund, perhaps. Incentives, removal barriers to educating and training workforce, incentivize production of credentials, degrees, and licensure, and so forth. And then it says down here, for the purposes of this subsection, health workforce includes behavioral health, which I think is critical. We won't reach parity, or parity will be meaningless unless we have the ability to provide the services. And then this position sets up for 4 years, basically, and can be renewed if need be. So with that, Leslie, I'm going to stop presenting and we can talk.
So you have a question here from Kate Garvey.
Hey, Kate.
And it says, this is exciting information and recommendations. Thank you. Do you feel there are areas that are likelier to be implemented?
Yes, I think that the pressure right now on healthcare and behavioral health at the General Assembly is critical, and to a certain extent, public health. The reason public health doesn't quite rise to the same level in our discussions is that the agency, VDH, has gotten $52 million of ARPA funds to reimagine the public health workforce and to do some of their work. And my hope is that all this would align well, but I think the opportunity in human services is to really dovetail with this, with these concepts. I think that, it becomes critical for the human services employers, you and your private agency colleagues, to come together and do exactly what is happening in the Roanoke area, where you're sitting down and we're looking at the numbers. What do we need? What type of critters are we going to ask education to help us make? What are the career paths going to be? And we can't get them perfect, but we should be intentional about this, as opposed to just say, well, it is what it is. I also think that you, as the employers, are going to, you have needs that may be different. And what we find in healthcare, the needs of the healthcare employers are different than sometimes than what is required to get the degree and the certificate. And somebody needs to get that organized and call it over to education, say, make more of this, please. This is what's going to enable us to have people who can be successful at work. Another problem that I think is ripe for exploitation is there's a lot of talk about experiential learning. And this is really tricking in behavioral health where privacy becomes an issue. But it is really, I think, important that you think about how do we get kids in. We heard this when I was secretary. We send a kid for an experiential learning and they go to an agency and they sit at a desk for a while. They're not learning what it takes and whether this is a good fit for them. They've got to get that. And we have to also understand, even with lived experience, the kid coming out at 24 or 25 is not the same person in terms of maturity as somebody at 35. And that 35-year-old with life experience might be better able to handle the situation. So how do we get a career that allows people to get to age 35 where they can survive in your system? I mean, we would see that, this is something I know Jody Manns and I used to talk about a lot. So I think those are ways to do it. But my encouragement, Kate, would be to think regionally, sit down amongst yourselves, lay out what you need, what you think you need, and then let us help you get your academic partners in the room so that you can begin to have those conversations. I think the community colleges are ready for this. They clearly are getting a lot of emphasis. I think the whole shift in workforce or the fact that money now is being put in the economic development instead of sending straight to education is a sign that there needs to be more alignment between workforce needs and education. Does that begin to answer the question?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. So, good to see you again. How
Great to see you.
How is the crew at APHSA?
Everybody's good. Spread far and wide now, but good.
Yeah, I've suggested to Danny Avola that he hook up.
Yeah, that would be
quickly.
So excited for him coming on. Just so excited.
Yes. So anyway, anybody else have anything that they want to ask? Have I put everybody to sleep, Leslie?
I think everybody's being shy for some reason. I was just sitting here thinking,
Uh-oh.
I know it's scary.
Uh-oh.
I was thinking, but like I'm listening to what you're talking about, which is a great way to think about workforce. But then I'm thinking of immediate things that are happening right now where local governments have core things that they have to provide to keep the community safe and healthy, plus the new initiatives, for instance, the 988 rollout and Marcus Alert. And I know, folks are scratching their heads saying, how are we going to staff this up? Because, even if you have the money, you have the ability to these new programs, you got to have staff for it. And I just don't know if the legislators really fully understand what local governments are dealing with right now.
Well, I can tell you that on the healthcare side of things, you all have all seen the headlines about the nursing shortage and people leaving and becoming travelers, and so that your nurses are down. And so there was a request, one of the budget requests was to create nursing programs at the community college, and one of the nurse executives at a hospital said, well, are they going to steal my nurses to be teachers? I can't afford to do it. So at some point you have to break this cycle, and it's hard to do. And I think that I don't know, I'm not close enough to the human services at this point right now, but how are you making your case to the legislature? Is really the question. Are you speaking to them directly? Are you, I think that because of the opportunities in workforce right now, generally, I think minds are open to understanding. And I think part of it is letting them know you got the problem, but the other reason, they got to understand why it's important to them. Behavioral health is important to them right now because the hospitals were shut down. They couldn't get admissions in. You all know that, right? And when that happens, people complain. And bad things happen. Now, I think the issue here is how, and I'm going to say we because I've been in this too, is how do we in human services become an essential part of developing people that become productive employees and that then can sustain themselves over time. And framing it in that way aligns you with or us with I think what is needed right now. We need these young people to be able to get the education. And we hear in healthcare, why can't you go back to school? Well, I don't have childcare. Who does that? Who does that? We don't have transportation. Who does the wraparound that makes all of this work? And I don't think this is something that we were trying to work with in Petersburg when I was secretary. It can't all be the K-12 or the community college because they've got to do the education part. So how do we think about focusing our efforts around delivering what they want? Is that, unfortunately, the hard part of being virtual is I can't see people's faces. And see the response. And they say, it may be saying, although this guy's crazy, which may be true, but it also doesn't mean that it can't be on target a little bit too.
They may be diagnosing you a little bit, but that's okay.
That's all right.
That's what
That's all
human
right.
services people do. Do you see
Uh,
some of the Lisa Peacock and
yeah.
Rebecca Vinroot? Do you
Hi,
see those?
Lisa. How are you? How are things in Culpeper? Let's see what Rebecca has. It's a marketing issue. The challenge with marketing, Rebecca, is you got to have something to market. I mean, otherwise it's all fluff and that gets exposed really quickly. And we can't tell people about these opportunities to do wonderful things in life and help other people unless we actually have some clue ourselves what it is. So, that's which is why I think it requires this work. So, it all starts with small steps. I think you have to get a group to sit down and think through this. And I would suggest regional organization to this effort, maybe along the lines of your planning districts, because I would expect that every one of you, unless you have a lot of money, is losing people to your neighbor for the bonus. If we had that, and that's a loser's game for everybody.
Hey, Dr. Hazel, this is Daryl up at the Fairfax Community Services Board.
Daryl, I saw you pop on. You missed most
Yeah, I
of the
did.
show.
So you're exactly right. I mean, I think since the beginning of this calendar year, I think I've lost an employee to every other CSB in Northern Virginia region, and I probably swiped employees from most of the
they're
other
shaking
CSB
their heads. That I know.
But that musical chairs is happening, but we're also losing folks to these online platforms.
Right.
Because that's very appealing for folks, as well as the Anovas of the world and the Kaiser Permanentes of the world. So it's not just kind of one thing.
Daryl, the thing that boggles my mind is when you lose to the school system. I mean, you've got a county school system and you got a county government, and you're stealing from each other. Shalom,
Yes.
where are you? In Loudon. And with today's press in Loudon schools, I don't know why they would go, but the answer is you don't have Afghani refugees coming in the middle of the night to Dulles Airport. So, the things that you all have to deal with, you gotta deal with it in the bigger picture and not by yourselves. And I think that's where the collaboration helps. So I think my suggestion to Leslie's comment is to at least find an area or two, a region or two that wants to get together. Jim, I don't know, in your area with Richmond and Chesterfield and so forth, that you're probably seeing some of the same things. I'm confident Tidewater is, because you all got so many agencies down there. That to get together and say, all right, let's do what we got to do on the day job, but let's think about a better strategy for this, because this is a waste.
So, Doc, I want to add something to your story, and I love your story. It gets me really very excited because,
God, I didn't
as
mean to get you excited, Margaret. My
as
God, Leslie
as
warned me about that.
as Daryl indicated, us CSBs up in Region 2, we spent an awful lot of time talking about how we didn't have enough workforce to fill the positions we had before this last year or two, and now it's even worse. And as I looked at your slides, it all comes back to partnership, because even if DBHDS and health professions and DMAS are the lead, they really need to spend some time with the communities that are implementing the work. In the last couple of years, the number of transactional events that have been layered onto the work that our workforce has to do, in addition to the conflicts that are occurring between the various sets of regulations about how they do it,
Yeah.
it makes the private marketplace just so much easier to transition into, because a lot of the public stuff we have to deal with, they don't end up having to deal with there, other than just keeping their licenses and their CME and doing their practices. I don't mean to oversimplify, but in the public system, we have gotten extraordinarily administratively complex with all these little transactional gobbledygook stuff that work with us so we can make the work flow happen, whether it's a direct support professional or an MD.
Yeah,
Just a thought.
is transactional gobbledygook stuff a technical term, Margaret?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
That's how I
No.
make it all easy to wrap
So
yourself around.
I can tell you that in part of the dealing with the I had the good fortune to be able to sit with some of the appropriations team and staff last Friday, right? And explain that the reason you needed the special advisor in the governor's office is because there is nobody at the state level with the day job to sort this crap out. And it needs the day-to-day attention to do that. And I was pleased when, if you were following that bill, it got tabled in appropriations last Wednesday, and then it came back yesterday and came out 23-0. The big difference is that the governor's office last week spoke in favor of it. So I think they are understanding that there needs to be someone who has the responsibility, the authority, and the resources to say, okay, at the state level, we got to deal with this. And I think to the extent that that message perks up from you guys to your people, to the VACOs and the VALHSOs or the VACOs and the VMLs and so forth, it is. And Debbie has a comment here about the paperwork. It is true, Debbie. This is what we heard when I went back to the behavioral health slides and talked about the workplace and the expectation. When 50% of your time or 40% of your time is paperwork, Jim McGrath was big teaching me this. That's not what you were trained to do. That's not what makes you happy. That's not what's going to make a career. So I'm going to take the 9 to 5 and deal with that. We know that salaries, I think, Anita, the salary piece is necessary, but in itself is not sufficient. You can't pay people enough to do a bad job for very long. And unfortunately, it's this group that's going to have to help figure this out, because there is no one else. Don't look at me that way, Letitia. You just looked at your screen. I could say when I said this group, you all have to do it, because you all are the ones who are in the best position, I think, to understand the needs and what could be a better alternative. From the foundation standpoint, I think we can discuss how we might be able to help. As we are limited in size and scope too, and don't have enough money and necessarily to do everything. But my hope is that that somebody will whisper along the way that that health includes social determinants of health, which includes us, and that maybe our needs need to be considered in this pot as well.
Doc, do you think that Claude Moore could maybe get Deloitte to expand on the work they did with the health? I mean, to at least do it to look at human services, just like the nursing stuff you showed on the screen. Do you think there's any opportunity to do that?
I could talk to them, see what it would
Okay.
take, you know.
Okay.
But what we had there is the department was eager to have the help, because, you know, they needed to get focused, and we did talk with Jennifer Faison and the CSBs, and I sent them out to some of the CSB people too, to discuss as well. So, you know, I think figuring out what, you know, why don't you all think about what you need and then and what that would encompass, and then let's see how the best way to get it done might be. And maybe we can do it, maybe we'll need some help doing it, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I think there's opportunities, and I think people, from when I talk to the folks are wanting to work together on this. It's just hard. It's just such a big lift, and we really appreciate you, giving us some things to think about.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope this is helpful. And you know, I coming into the secretary job, it was funny. Secretary Littell and I talked, or were sending messages back and forth right after he got the job, and he said, Bill, he said, I can't believe they waited till Monday to appoint me for this job. And then I got here and I've got a secretary, but I think the furniture is the same furniture that you had. And I said, well, you had a 2-day advantage on me because they didn't tell me till Wednesday night. But, you know, I come out of the medical world. And so the time that I spent with the social service folks, the behavioral health folks was very educational to me. And it's something that I've carried with me since then. So I'm eager to see you all be successful.
Well, Dr. Hazel, thank you so much for being with us this morning and for providing this information and for giving us our marching orders. I mean, we have work to do ourselves to make this happen and to address this issue.
And yeah, I'm sympathetic to where do I find the time to do this, but at some point, if we keep doing what we've been doing, we aren't going to get where we need to be.
Yep, you're exactly right. So thank you again. So
Thanks, everybody. Best wishes.
Thanks, Doc.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Les.
Thank you.
Bye. So we have about 8 minutes. We're going to start the next session promptly at 11, and this will be a panel discussion on the remote workforce. So please take a quick break and join us back at 11 o'clock.
Thank you.
Hi, Ian.
Good morning. How
What?
are you?
Good. Thanks for doing this today.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. How are you? I popped on and recognized your voice. I'm like, always up to the same old thing, causing trouble and giving the guest speaker a hard time. I was like, that's only you.
Yeah, I'm so shy. I know.
It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too.
Been too long.
I know. Maybe one day they'll let us have play dates again.
Hopefully soon. One can hope.
Ben, you're muted. There you
Thank you.
go.
I just figured that out too. I was going to mention to you, Leslie, that on my laptop, if I hit the show participants button and let's see, how does it, if you do hide participants, then you get the bigger screen. It's so
Yeah.
that, is that working for you now? You were saying that your screen was little.
It was weird because it was like Doc Hazel was on the big screen, but I could see his small. But I figured it out.
Oh,
I
okay.
every now and then show my age when it comes to technology stuff. But it was weird because like he was up on my screen and it was in a little small screen like his PowerPoint. I was sitting there going, yeah, I'm not going to be able to read that. So yeah. Good to have. I'm glad I have partners like you that have my back, though.
There we go. Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. And we are very excited to continue our conference. Wasn't Dr. Hazel amazing? He's given us our marching orders, however, so we've got work to do yet. But we continue our conference deliberations this morning with our next amazing panel. We are going to talk about who's got the remote, the future of the remote workforce in local government and human services. This group had an amazing discussion preparing for today's session, and if it's anywhere close to the engagement that we had during our earlier session, I think we're in for a very informative time. So we have, again, our wonderful panel. They are Denise Gallup, who is the director of the Norfolk Department of Human Services. Also, Ms. Rebecca Vinroot, who comes to us from James City County, where she is director of the Human Services Department there. And lastly, Mr. Ian Sansoni, who is with the Department of Social Services for Prince William County.
Morning,
So
everyone.
we're going to get started. Many of us have had to, by necessity, engage in telework and developing our remote workforces. Some of us, though, have already innovated that prior to the pandemic, and we're very excited that on our panel, we have a mix of participants in terms of how they came to using remote workforces. We have large and small agencies, and I think we'll just go ahead and get started with Ms. Denise Gallup, who will begin our discussion.
Level with the day job.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be a part of this presentation this morning. Vin is correct. We had a fantastic pre-session where we were able just to kind of talk about things that we all are facing. And I know if nothing else, I felt that we learned a bit about each other, but we also learned a bit about things that we might do a little differently. And so I have the pleasure of serving as the director for the city of Norfolk, Virginia, of Human Services. I believe that, of course, I'm biased, that that's the best agency in the entire state, but I'll take it back because I know that you all may rate me, on my presentation. I would hate for you to give me an F because I said that. So let's act like I didn't. Oh crap, it's being taped. But anyway, You all, you may not know this, but I'm sure there are Norfolk employees that are participating today. And so they certainly needed to hear that from their directress. So it's my pleasure to talk about who has the remote. I think that a presentation is going to be pulled up. I'm not sure who's controlling that for us. Oh, there it is. Fantastic. And if it can be blown up a little bit bigger, we could go right to the second page. One of the things you'll find out about me is as excitable as I am, I don't necessarily have the patience for nice and fun technology. So our executive assistant is the bomb.com, and she put all that little cute stuff where you hit the button and this happens. But I'm asking Patel, if you could just put everything that should be on the slide, just hit the buttons until it gets to everything on that particular slide, because that'll help us with time. Now, I'm not sure. I think you are working that for me. Is that right? Probably yes, since I don't hear anything. So let's just go to the next. There you go. Beautiful. So Norfolk decided in 2018 that we wanted to move to a teleworking environment. And we did it for a lot of the reasons that Secretary Hazel, former Secretary Hazel, spoke about this morning. And it's because we knew that we would never be the highest paying organization in our region and in the state. We also knew that the workforce was beginning to change, and those individuals who, like us, who may have some form of a work-life balance, or the baby boomers who their life revolved around their work, the workforce shifted on us, and we now have individuals that really life is in the middle and work revolves around their life. And so because of that, we wanted to come up with a way to be able to recruit for all kinds of people, utilizing technology as a way and flexibility as a way to help us to do that. So on this slide, there were some things already happening in 2018 and 2019 that just made life easier. I think we all know for human services, FSW workers had already, the majority of your work happens in the community. And our state did some pretty cool things in order to help people to get the documentation done at the same time, if you will, that they were engaging families, like the opportunity to easily get laptops and flex dictate, where you could just literally walk out of your visit, sit in your car and dictate what happened. And now the Compass iPad, where the goal is to be able to use this tool in the setting with the family or with the children that you are engaging. So we had that going on. But the other thing Norfolk began to realize is that benefits work proved not to be dependent on a specific address. So we were already doing a lot of preparation, as I think all of us in human services do from time to time, about what happens if a disaster hits. The D-SNAP word makes us all crazy and want to go hide. But what we have to prepare for is, in the event that a disaster is so large, how do we rev up quickly in order to get things done for our families? At the same time, Common Help was born, online anytime. Really gave this platform for those that we serve an opportunity to engage us around the clock. And people, as you know, were literally putting in applications at 2:00 in the morning on a Saturday, times in which we were not necessarily in the building. And then we had some things happening in our own city that just kind of demonstrated that you don't have to be married to a specific building to get it done. We were doing different types of fairs where we would take our setup out to the scope. We would do all these different things. And so moving to the next slide, please, Patel. An epiphany happened. That's what the next slide says. It was some aha moments for Norfolk. It's like, what? So if remote can work some of the time, why couldn't we use it most of the time? And so in order for us to be able to do that successfully, we had to do a couple things. And Patel, you could just hit it 3 times and all 3 things should pop up. We figured out very quickly that every employee, regardless of your position and your role, needed a laptop. Now, Norfolk is like a lot of other localities where we just don't have the funds sitting, to purchase things with local only money. So what we decided is every single time there was a refresh opportunity offered by the state, we would, instead of requesting desktops, regardless of what your position, we requested a laptop. So people at our front desk who still have to come in, bless their hearts, into our building, they have laptops that if they had to move the front desk next door, they could. Every single employee who were responsible for engaging customers needed access to an iPhone. And we specifically went for iPhones versus any other type of technology, only because it just gave us more flexibility in being able to do interviews with customers. It gave us more flexibility in being able to do off-site meetings or supervisory conferences. It just really helped us to have all of our employees using the same type of technology so that we could communicate rapidly at almost any time of the day and night. The other thing we figured out is that every space would need to be maximized. We did that for a variety of reasons. First reason had everything to do with the fact that people have a tendency to own their space. The group and I, when we met the other day, we joked about how, you've sat in this cube for the last 25 years and this is my cube. And how do you know? Because your teddy bear's in there and your plants are in there and you got all your nice signs up. But in order for folk to realize that we have moved to a place where the building is a necessity, it is not a place you just come to hang out. We had to begin to have folk to remove their personal things and move to a model of sharing space. That caused a whole lot of folk to want to work from home. Next slide. So it's lots of great advantages. Yes, Patel, that's it. That's how I like it. Put it up there quick. Lots of great advantages to working remotely. I'll start at the bottom of the list, although our financial people on the thing probably have already peeped out the first one. But I'll start with the fact that we just could not pay people what we believe they are worth and still have them work in the city of Norfolk in human services. It just wasn't going to happen. So that flexibility, being able to work peak performance hours, having that work-life balance became the thing that we used to market why you would want to work in Norfolk. Also, when some of the staff would leave and go work for an agency that could fit their needs financially, in many cases, they were willing to work with us part-time because they already knew our culture. They knew we were extremely flexible and we had gadgets that could go along with them. Increased productivity and customer satisfaction. Man, I cannot tell you how big this was for us. Folk were really getting the work done, partly because you're not distracted by all of your friends who come to work to catch up around how did your weekend go. And it just really helped us to see that when people can go in a space where they can really focus without having to worry about thousands of telephones ringing at the same time or being inundated with lots of other things, they can focus on the work. The customer also had a greater degree of satisfaction. I always joke with human services people and remind us that as much as we believe that our customers love us, they don't. They don't love us. As a matter of fact, they really don't want to see us. They only come to us because they have nowhere else to go. They can't even go to the next city to get SNAP. If they live in Norfolk and they hate every SNAP worker in Norfolk, they can't say, I'm going to Virginia Beach because I love those workers there and I'm going to get my SNAP in Virginia Beach. But you're not. You still have to come right back. And so when you can get the work done timely and accurately, that's what our customers love. That whatever it is that you should do, that you do it on time, ahead of time. That is what causes satisfaction. Next is just we eliminated the need. Oh, wait a minute. I cannot minimize the reduction of employee conflicts and building complaints. So I don't know about you all, when you have over 500 employees and 300 of them might be co-located in a space, from time to time, there are employee conflicts that happens. I hate her perfume. I'm allergic to flowers. Oh my God, I can't believe she's eating at her desk again. Can she turn her music down? She's talking too loud. All of these kinds of things that end up developing into disciplinary issues for someone to manage. Or, oh, I think this is a sick building. Every time I walk in, I immediately get sick. My allergies goes haywire. You don't have enough toilets. They're not big enough. They're not wide enough. Oh, I broke it again. All of these things became like a moot point because you're in the comfort of your own home or wherever you decide to do the work. So we were able to eliminate the need for big box buildings. They were outdated. They were entirely too hard to manage. Many of you may have come to Norfolk and even attended a training at our Workforce Development Center. Well, that's one of the biggest box buildings you will ever find that also came with a variety of headaches. And so our ability to close that office and to close 3 satellite offices meant that we could save number one, over $700,000 of local funds. Now that's important because then you can do a whole bunch of nuancing around getting your iPhones, around getting whatever technology you need when you can show that moving in this direction could be helpful for an organization. Okay, next slide. So we had to overcome some barriers, outdated and rigid philosophies related to people, places, and things. So you already know the story. Who serves who? You should have to come to me to get it because you're desperate to get it. Why should I be flexible and adjust my life to you? We went through that whole struggle of how bad do you want it? Are you willing to take 5 buses in order to get to the Workforce Development Center at 4 o'clock and find out that the systems have been shut down? All of those things, we had to work through those in a very real way. The tale of 2 worlds, that connectivity issue. We happen to be an agency where we are a deviating agency. I hate that language, but it just means that we work primarily with our local government in order to get the things that we need. But we know that all of our programs happen in the state. So how do? You get a local remote app, or do you do the state VPN? It's just all these kinds of things that we had to really work through in order to ensure that productivity happened. And then an even exchange is required. If you really want to know how your employees are working and how they are engaging customers, send them home to work. The thing that I love about the majority of our work, particularly benefits work, is it can be measured. It can be counted. You know exactly what people are doing at any given point. And because of that, if we expect productivity, we knew that it required discipline. If we expect people to be responsible users of the time, then it would have to be some accountability measures put in place. And wherever there is flexibility, then those of us who lead and manage, we have to be able to trust. I want to say that's my last slide. Is that right? I move up. Yes, I move quickly because you have to hear from our other panelists. They are thebomb.com.
Thank you so much, Denise. And your remarks have generated some questions. However, we're going to hold off on responding to the questions because I think that there are going to be some of those same questions that the other panelists can also give their perspectives on. So we're changing the channel now, and we're going to hear some perspectives from Ms. Rebecca Vinroot first regarding her work with remote workforce at a level 2 agency, James City County.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me well. I really appreciate being part of this panel. My name is Rebecca Vinrud, and I am what I will now refer to myself as the directress of James City County, borrowing that from Denise. James City County is a level 2 agency, and we have about 70 staff. So we are certainly not the size of some of our larger agencies, but I really appreciate the opportunity to bring the perspective of an agency our size, because we do have a lot of the same issues and are dealing with a lot of the same things. So it really is always helpful to hear from different size agencies and how they overcome or how they're dealing with some of these challenges. So similar to Norfolk, we did start talking about telework back in 2019. We had a strategic plan that we did for our agency, and in looking through how we're going to move forward and make sure that we are responding to the needs of our customers and our staff, there were a couple of things that popped up that made telework seem like it was something we needed to pursue. First and foremost, physical space. So we only have, well, we have one large building, and then we have 2 smaller programs that are other places. But we share our building with a medical clinic, and we were running out of room. So we certainly had that issue to address. And so one of the things that came up is if you don't have enough space, physical space for your staff, then let's explore telework as an option. Also, operational efficiency. Are there technologies that we can leverage so that we don't always need to be physically in the same space with each other? So Denise went through and did a great job of mentioning all of those technologies and things that made it more applicable so that we could actually tell. And then team growth and culture. We were looking at our staff and looking at other places that were implementing telework and thought we need to get with the program. You know, we need to be able to be offering these things to our staff. And so certainly that was one of the things that led us to let's talk about telework. So we, as we do in a lot of things, we said, who else is doing telework? So we did actually get a lot of our information from Norfolk. So thank you, Denise, for that. Because I do think, again, all of these things are similar. So we started to talk about a pilot, and we went through, we had a work group at all levels of the agency, and we talked about what positions made more sense to telework, and of course benefits rose to the top. You know, we have common health, we have things that you can do remotely. We can certainly make sure that you are being productive, that you're meeting all of the timeliness, all of the compliance issues. And then services staff, you're mobile, you're out in the field. So when we talked about our job descriptions and our positions, those were the positions that we were going to start with. And we did want to start with those employees who have been here the longest. You know, those who we knew they had a firm foundation, they knew what their job was about. And so again, we were all geared up for the pilot, and we were going to start the pilot in March of 2020. And we all know what happened. So the pilot went to, okay, let's get going. So I am very proud of my staff that we were, you know, one of the only departments in the county that was like, all right, you know, we had our, for the most part, our technology, because we did exactly the same thing as Denise mentioned. When it was a refresh, it was a laptop. And our services staff already had iPhones, and we were able to purchase some iPhones for our benefits. So we just said, okay, you guys, let's go, let's do this. Now, one of the challenging parts was our administrative staff. So unfortunately, our phone system it's not able to work as remotely as we would like. So we did have to still have staff coming into the building. However, what made staff feel a little more comfortable was that not everybody was there. So because we had fewer staff in the building, they were able to spread out. But I do think one of the challenges that I saw that I don't think we anticipated right away was the effect that had on some feelings of equity. There were certainly some folks who were like, why is this person at home in their pajamas all day and I'm here in the office? And so we had to do a lot of work around, some people actually don't like telework. Some people have to do it because that's what we have to do to be safe. But other people, maybe they want to be, you know, in the building. But out of necessity, we need to be teleworking. So we did work through this, and we also said we want to plan for every staff to be able to telework. So if you have barriers to overcome, like technology, let's work on that. But again, not all of those are quick fixes. So fast forward to today, we still continue to telework. We moved from what we called our COVID telework program to our regular telework program. And I will say overall, James City County as a locality has done their best to embrace telework. There are departments other than just social services that are teleworking. So we were able to I guess, be innovators and that, which is always appreciated when we're able to kind of start things off. Because when you start things off, you get a little more leverage than if you're following, behind others. But we have changed all of our job descriptions so that position is either regular telework or intermittent telework. Because what we do want to be, one of my goals is to be person-centered. And so you may have a staff that, has a situation, like we have a staff that is going out for surgery. She can still work because it's not, surgery that affects anything to where she can't work, but she's going to be homebound for a while. But she's able to telework, and she would prefer to do that versus using all of her leave. And so situations like that, I do think, unfortunately, because of our size of our agency, we are able to be a little more person-centered, I think, than if you've got several more staff. But that is really a goal of ours. I do think for our customers, it was a bit of a shift for some. But however, one of the things in our county is that we have some transportation issues. So we have folks, we're a very long county. So we have folks who could live in one end of the county, and even though our building is as centrally located as it can be, people are getting on the bus and people have their kids they got to wrangle and all of that stuff. And so if you don't need to come in, you shouldn't have to. And so we certainly, again, that's person-centered for the client. So we're really trying to say, if you don't need to come in, you shouldn't have to come in. But just as that led to us trusting each other and our staff, it led to us trusting our customers. So there definitely has been some trust things that have come up that I think we've all had to work through. And now, fast forward to today, we are open. Our lobby is open. You can come in. We've got administrative staff. We have staff. We no longer share offices. We have people have their own space, and we have more of a rotation. So if you would like to telework, you can telework. We don't have people 100% teleworking for the most part. We have it more on a rotation because we do still have some physical space issues. But I will say we see less people in the lobby. We do still have people coming in because there are, going to some of the comments in the chat, there are certainly some people who just want to come in. They want to have that face-to-face and mask up and come on in. We do work through that. So I do think we're evolving. But what I appreciated about the conversation we had before and what I appreciate about this conversation that we're having right now is that every locality is different. And I do think you really have to look at your own community. And I think you do have to assess what does your community want and what does your community need and your staff. And so if staff are pushing back to say, I want to telework more, you need to explore that because that's going to retain your staff. If your customers are saying, I want to see people more in the office, why is that? You have to work through that. So there does need to be this continual engagement. It's not a one and done. It's definitely an evolving process. And so I think in terms of next steps, we're just going to continue to have the conversations. We did have to pull some staff in. We were looking at compliance. We had some compliance issues. So we had to say, what's going on? Do you need to be in here so you can talk more with your coworkers and get some additional training? You have to have that communication. You can't just expect people to go in their own world and not check back in. So I do think that this is something that we're going to continue to evolve. But I just appreciate, because I think to be competitive, just going back to some of the other stuff that Dr. Hazel talked about, we have to be innovative. We have private businesses that are innovative, and if we're going to compete with them, and we have to be flexible and innovative. And the majority of us do that in our work with families. So we need to do that in our staff. So that's all I have.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rebecca. And our cleanup hitter is Mr. Ian Sansoni with Prince William County.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank Rebecca and Denise, and I will caution you, I don't have enough coffee in my house to keep up with Denise, so that's not going to happen. If you're expecting that, I'm going to lower your expectations a little bit. But I do appreciate the very, what I'd call practical and tactical ways that were shared today. And Mr. Patel, if you could share a slide, please. I want to share with you briefly a slide that my director shares with all supervisors and managers in supervisor and manager orientation. And what I want to frame this conversation around is where we're living and how we're measuring our impact. And so I suspect that most of us on this call are living in the third quadrant on the bottom, which, and by the way, this is not something I created. I stole it from my director, all truth be told, and I could not find the source. So I would like to provide source with information. I was not able to do that as quickly as I was trying to get this pulled up, but just wanted to put that out there. And I want to just encourage you to pause here for a minute and think about our conversations today as executive leaders on this call about where you're living, and then launch into this discussion about telework, the environment that we're finding ourselves in, and what I'd call the acceleration of innovation due to a crisis. And if you think back, and I know this is a really kind of sad analogy, but how accelerated did our world live or change after 9/11? And what that does. Like I'm getting on a flight tomorrow, and every experience I have on that flight will be different pre and post 9/11. And I think that we're going to look back on history and look at pre and post pandemic as that opportunity. And so what I really want to look at how the crisis accelerated our innovation. We moved from telework pilots, which we really weren't doing prior to COVID, because we did that early on in the early 2000s, maybe in the 2010 range, and we just went to straight telework, right? So we kind of use this word pivoted, but I really think that as we continue to move forward and move from these temporary systems into permanent telework, permanent remote work, we really have to look and live in this improving the system and creating the future. And so I just want to challenge you all, and collectively, including myself, at the end of every day, can I walk away from the work that we've done, and have I improved it? And have I created the future? And a lot of the telework and a lot of the systems that we're doing and talking about, and the intersection of our customer experience is around those two things. My job is to improve the system both for our staff, to create what we call a non-event experience. They should have a seamless experience with the customer. And so a lot of that regards, a lot of the work on my end and our director's responsibility is to improve the systems and create the future. And if you think through that lens, there's a lot of things that we must do. And I'll just use some examples that are relevant to social services. You know, we had technology changes. We were purchasing laptops and mobile devices and hotspots prior to the pandemic, because this is our expectation. This is where we were headed. And so I don't think there's two things that I don't think were extremely hard for us conceptually. Is one is we were already putting the technology in place, and I do understand that some localities are challenged by budgets. Fortunately for us, we were able to make those changes prior to the pandemic, so we had the infrastructure in place. And the second thing is, and I can't emphasize this enough, I do not have a human services background by nature of my entire career. I think our folks are incredibly resilient. And so we're in great company here that, you know, social services, human service agencies are leading the way in localities in terms of innovation, because we are resilient, and that's the work that we do. So I can't emphasize that enough, of being in great company and those kind of things. So I enjoy being in that company because we are, you know, resilient, and we turn on a dime. And then as we launch into some very practical discussions, I want to also share a thought with you about this conversation regarding the remote services we should provide and the lens that we should live or look into. I also stole this comment from Mr. Beckett from Fairfax County. He's the director there. And we were on a call a couple weeks ago, and he shared this thought that they look at new programs or even existing ones through the lens of who does it benefit the most and who does it benefit the least. And I really appreciated that comment, because when it comes to staff being in the office, staff being at home, the services we provide, whether it's in-person or remote, we really need to ask that question. And obviously it goes without saying that it shouldn't be benefiting us the most, but we should also be having that challenging conversation. And this can be an equity-based conversation about staff who feel they should be teleworking versus in the office. And the reality is, in Prince William County's stance is we do not have a quote unquote permanent telework policy. We allow telework. We try and facilitate that and support that. However, if we need to call you in the office, whether you live in Winchester or Fredericksburg or you live in Southern Virginia, that's our right and that's the expectation. So we have to be very clear with staff that our telework program is a privilege, not a right, and that we do it for the benefit of our customer, and there has to be business justification. And like Rebecca alluded to, we've had folks who could not manage the trust that went along with telework, the latitude, and we've brought them in. And the reality is that the other thing that I'd say is there's some things that telework has highlighted, some deficiencies in management that we saw. For example, and this is a true story for us, or for me. I had a manager who wanted to put tracking software on their employees on computers. And it blew me away at the high level manager in our organization asked that question, and really highlighted more about trust and management than it did about tracking the employees. And so that issue predated COVID, right? But this is what a crisis will do. It'll open your eyes to those kind of things. So we also had management and trust challenges, very minimal. But I do believe that it forced us to have some of those conversations about how are we managing performance? How are we communicating with our employees? How are we leaning into this trust relationship with staff? And how are you measuring output? If someone has a child sitting next to them at home, or a family member, or their roof's getting repaired, or whatever that potential perceived distraction could be, we're all going to live with some level of tolerance and accept that as long as the work's being done. And so our focus should not be, on Tuesday afternoon, you weren't at your desk 13 minutes after I called you. It was, did you do your work, and what are we measuring, and how is that happening? And my thought for that is, if you weren't doing that pre-pandemic, you certainly didn't pivot quickly to that in the pandemic. And those who tried to had a significant challenge. And so as leaders, when we create the future, that's what we need to be focusing on, is how do we create our staff and the capacity of our teams that can withstand these kinds of crises, because they will come again and they will continue. And a lot of what we work in today is the ambiguity and the unknown of when it's going to end. And my encouragement to you would be, from a resiliency standpoint, what systems, what culture, what things are you putting in place to withstand the next crisis, or to continue through this pandemic, because we just don't know. I'd also like to talk a little bit about the intersection of our systems. I think that our systems, our processes, and our policies are now catching up to the innovation that we switched to quickly. For example, the state allowed for virtual visits, and so in our conversations, how do we create the future? I think it's incumbent upon us to go back to the state and a lot of these policy or oversight organizations and have a conversation about what we can live with. We all know that being in a house and observing the situational awareness is preferable, but we also know that there's innovation that came out of some of these exceptions to longstanding policies that we want to live with. And so it's our job as leaders, both for our clients and for our workforce, to lean into that and have those conversations and find the common ground between what's practical and keeping our staff safe, keeping our folks safe, and innovating to where we can lead cutting edge services. So I think it's really important. And then I also want to talk a little bit about system alignment from a very practical standpoint and practical example of, we had folks teleworking who were not in the office and a computer crashed. Are we going to mail computers to their house? Or are we going to expect them to come back to a building to get that service? And that's part of the conversation we're having now about hiring, advertising, expectations. Because what's happening, as we know, and you heard on this call earlier, the competitive job market was flattened with telework. There's some things that Prince William County can offer salary-wise that another part of the state can't, and we recognize that. And so we empathize and sympathize with that, but we also have to live in a competitive market, even in our own region. So what are we doing in our organization that's going to help us compete both nationally, but locally and globally? And so there's things that we have to look at in terms of our ability to support telework, the culture, the expectations around work-life balance. Are we willing to live with, hey, I got to walk my dog 3 times a day, and that's okay? Are we professionally mature enough to manage that way? And so these are the difference makers when you can't just pay someone another $10,000 bonus, as was talked about during Dr. Hazelwood's presentation. Great conversations, global challenges that we're all facing. And frankly, in a line of work where you have an inordinate amount of mandates, when the public health emergency mandates end, and now you have to start doing renewals. That's going to be an insane amount of work for staff. And so the pressures add, or, you know, in child welfare lines of work, how are we supporting our CPS staff with an increase in calls now that the schools are coming back? So the seasonality that dropped during the pandemic is now returning, and now we have a backlog of cases. So our challenges are going to remain in a line of work that have heavy mandates that exceed our ability as individuals to touch every single transaction. And I'm not sure how we're going to solve that. We're going to have to be lean and create the systems and create, you know, eliminate barriers so people can do their job most effectively, leveraging technology, leveraging our systems, and working with the state, working with our oversight agencies on improving a lot of the systems that we use. And I know that VDSS has done a lot of work and just in the traditional lines of social work on improving those systems. We have to continue to get better. And one of the things, you know, that I absolutely live for every day locally is how do I improve the systems on the areas that we have control over so that people can do their job most effectively? How do we serve those who serve others by providing them the right tools, the right technology? And so, you know, we need to eliminate those things that we can as leaders so that people can do their job without interference from, over regulation or bureaucracy, and while staying within the boundaries. And then the last thing I think is creating a culture, an online culture. How do you do that? How do we, as a department of 465 employees across 7 locations and 350 square miles, with 24-hour operations, homeless shelters, juvenile detention centers, traditional VDSS lines of business, CSA, how do we create a culture, an organ, that's equitable, that's valuing our minority majority community, and creating a workplace that reflects our community, that we want to be one vision, transforming lives and human services, as Prince William County has embarked on. And so that's a challenge. We do remote orientations, and I'll never know everyone's name, and have to be honest with them that if I'm in a building, I may see you in orientation yesterday, but I'm not going to remember your name, because that's one of the challenges we live with. And so we have to really encourage our folks and staff to check in with our teams regularly, not just on a transaction, but on a life basis. And I think the pandemic has highlighted that we're all screens, but we're all people. And so we need to take that time as leaders to check on our team, not when you need something, but when you want to hear from them because you care about them. And so those are just some of the things that I leave with you as we're trying to create this culture that we support our team. And honestly, as I tell people, and one of the reasons you see this wall behind me, because this is what I live for. This is my family. I don't live for Prince William County and work. And it's the compassionate burnout is a very real thing that we all know about, but sometimes we're not disciplined enough to forget. And so I love to keep this wall up here as a reminder. And these are some of the house values that we have for my kids. And I point them back there often. I have a 5 and 7-year-old. And so sometimes when we're working through things, I'm like, hey, go back to the wall, look at that. Does that meet our family values or goals? And so I hold those to myself, because I have to look at that every time it's 5 o'clock and I need to go get my kids, or 3:30, and my son's 5 years old and wants to play, on the floor. Do I walk away? And do I live by these values? And as a constant reminder. So I tell people, if you can't be the best you at home, you can't be the best you at work, right? And so we need to take care of ourselves so we can take care of others. And I think nothing has highlighted that more, the desire for that more, the need for that more, than a pandemic and what we're hearing from our multi-generational workforce. So with that, I really appreciate you having me. I'm happy to answer any questions or, defer back to the facilitator. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you so much, Ian, Denise, and Rebecca, for your reflections on your experience with telework, as well as where you kind of see your organizations going in the future with telework. We in the city of Newport News have also been challenged with the remote workforce concept, but we have gone into it wholeheartedly. We were also actually in preparing a pilot for telework prior to the pandemic beginning. And so we were convenienced by the fact that we actually had a plan so that when the pandemic hit, before we had officially received the approval to begin, we were ready to go with strategies. And similarly, we had already gotten all of the appropriate equipment, etc. We look now towards continuing telework. I think one of the common themes for us all is that we don't see ourselves going back to the way things were before. And so how do our programs need to evolve as it continues, emerges out of crisis mode to regular operating mode? So we have also created our regular telework policy, and we're in the process now of looking at how we do go to a 24-hour type operation with alternative schedules for staff, shared office spaces, and reducing our footprint in our existing very large structure. I think that one of the considerations that will come given the competition that there is for employees is whether or not it's practical and doable to nationalize, if you will, our workforces and be able to recruit from all over the country for certain kinds of jobs for which truly 100% remote work is possible and feasible. So there may be types of legislation and other kinds of arrangements that need to be made to facilitate that. But if it can be done at the federal government level and in private business, it should be possible if we put our minds to it and put the right tools and mechanisms in place to take advantage of it. So I think when we look at the future of remote work in local government, that may be one of the areas that down the road will represent an expansion.
Ben, may I add to that one thought?
Sure.
This is a thought that I don't talk about often because it's a scary perspective that I'm not sure how to reconcile, or we're going to innovate our way to it. But artificial intelligence is disrupting workforces, from radiologists and banks of millions of scans, and I can only help but wonder, in a world where we sit with constant findings with our transaction-oriented mandates and benefits, when will it do it to our workforce? With the remember, if you think back to the Affordable Care Act and the website that crashed, I believe it was, with the number of applications.
Yes.
There's systems in place, and I know that there's a lot of things that have to align, but one day we will be facing this conversation where we have a few staff that do QA but manage the intake process. So this is something that I think we're going to continue to struggle with, but at the end of the day, it may reduce our workforce, and that we're going to have to, this is something that I think is going to transform the landscape of public benefits on the transaction side, and that we're going to have to be prepared for. We're going to have to start looking for other ways and training our staff on skill gaps and repurposing staff, and what that answer is. It's a quandary to me. But I can't help but wonder how we're going to meet these mandates. And the only way that I think we're going to meet them is through technology like AI, but it's also going to come with some very significant workforce challenges. And you're talking about the global market and the national economy. So something I just put out there, I don't know what that answer is. And I'm very cautious about talking about it because it's mass job displacement if technology gets to the point. And we may not be close to that, but I don't know. I'm very curious about that.
Very frightening concept, at least for me.
I wanted to add, I kind of wanted to weigh in a little bit about what Ian was saying, because I often think about that. I think about how, if you remember, there was a time you would go into a department store, and if you wanted to know what the cost of something would be with the coupon that you may have and all these things, you would have to find a sales associate that would then have to go back to the register. Well, that is totally literally you go up to the little scanner thing. Not only does it tell you how much it originally cost, it tells you how much it will cost with your coupon. It tells you how much it would cost if you get a credit card. And that little small convenience for a customer then minimize the need for however many sales associates. And so I think that we would be naive not to begin to think about how that looks for the human services field. One of the benefits that the remote working model has had in Norfolk is we have been able to assess people's true skill and their true heart. I'm like Rebecca, I'm real big on person-centered when it comes to our employees. And what we found is we have some great benefits workers who would have been chained to the desk, if you will, who, because now they're remote, they come to me and say, they call me DG. DG, would you have a problem if I went and set up at the senior center down the road? Because you know those people, those grandma and grandpas, they can come into the building and they don't necessarily trust the technology. They want to have that human connection. And so would you mind if I did that? I'm thinking, girl, you just made my day. So it's literally, how do we begin to think about who we have on our staff, who we are looking for? As Ian said, how do we train up in those gap areas? Because when technology takes over the things that technology really could do right now, if we in the human services world got it right, like the private world has done, when that happens, we need to be ready to pivot just as quickly as some of us were ready to pivot for COVID. And that goes right back to training, that goes back to tapping into what causes people to want to do this type of work, and how can we create more of it. The people don't go away even when they get all of their benefits through electronic means. The people will always have a need for some form of engagement. We just got to be ready for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And your discussion, all of you, has generated many questions, some of which we've addressed to some degree or other. One that I'll call out is, how does, this question says Norfolk, but I suspect any and all of you, how do you assess customer satisfaction?
I actually saw that question because that is from my old friend Crystal Bell, who we have known each other for 1,000 years when we were social workers in Newport News. And so for us, customer satisfaction is measured on a couple of things. The first is by literally engaging the customer to see, did they get what they were looking for? Was somebody responsive? We have workers right now, even our FAP programs, everything that we're doing, we're using technology to do it. We have more parents and families participating in conference meetings, in FAP team meetings than we've ever had, because we've been able to be more flexible. And so what we get a chance to do is literally to talk to them about how this experience is going. We found in Norfolk that the majority of every customer that we work with have some type of technology gadget, whether that's an iPhone or some other way to communicate with us. And what they appreciate is the ability to do so. I guess the measure for us is the opposite. The measure for us is when people reach out to us specifically to say, the worker hadn't called me back. Where is my SNAP benefits? You know, that kind of thing. We still have a traditional process in place where folk can call in to report an issue. We have ways for them to contact us, all of us, to include me, via the internet. We have a 211 system in Norfolk, and that system operates 24 hours a day. So if someone calls in because they've had a struggle or an issue with getting what they need, they are able to do that, and they can connect with us right away. So it all goes back to, what is the thing that the person should have gotten, and did they get it? And when they went to get it, was it convenient for them? Was it were they engaged with dignity and respect? And then really, how have they continually been participating in the process? So I think about Crystal, I automatically think about FAP, automatically think about CSA, and the fact that we've had more family participation in that area than we've ever had. It's just amazing, because we removed that barrier of having to come to the building in order to engage.
Yes. We're going to close with one last question. I'm sorry we won't be able to get to all of the questions, but I do think this one merits some closing comments. Lisa Peacock is asking, how you are implementing whole family or 2-gen in this remote environment? That's a great question. Would one of you like to address that?
Rebecca, I don't want to, Ian, you may know, I know that you say that you are not a social worker, although I do not agree with you. You are a social worker. If I've ever met one, I would hire you today as one. I don't know if you want to do that one, Rebecca, if you want to touch it. Y'all just let me
I'll take
know.
a shot and then I'll pass it to my colleague with, who got the red memo or the pink memo, Rebecca. By the way, my director does call me a SWIT, which is a social worker in training, and I've been there 6 years and I've never graduated. So I'm protesting the degree requirements as we speak. Yeah. So this idea of the remote or the 2-gen family, I really think it comes down to the beauty of the and versus the tyranny of the or. The beauty of the and is you can do both, right? And so what I mean by that is Prince William County has a leadership philosophy that says the people who do the work know the work the best, and we push that down. We have teams where we have folks that just hate being at home, and we have folks that can't handle being at home, and we bring them into the office or we allow them the opportunity. One thing that we've done is taken a space agnostic approach to our office space in some areas where we can allow people to share offices or sit in a cube. Like yesterday I worked in our homeless services division across county, right? So I work wherever there's internet. So as long as we're flexible and allow people to do that, and we allow people the latitude, meaning managers and supervisors, to make those decisions, then we do that. And so that's kind of been Prince William County's approach with some of our telework policies. We've had a lot of questions about the ambiguity, right? And so we have to just be comfortable with managing the ambiguity. And I don't mean that we just don't have rules or parameters, but it's situational, and human services is situational. Director Tierney, my boss, has a saying that I really love, which is once you've seen one, you've seen one, and that DSS agencies. And that's so true. And oftentimes in life, it's the same with people and the same with managerial situations. It's highly situational, and we have to be flexible. And part of that, creating the future and improving the system, is a commitment to that.
Absolutely. And I think that was an excellent quote to end our session on, although I will add that Newport News has an active 2-gen program, and we have managed to maintain it through our telework or remote work process, because a lot of that work is done in the field anyway, if you will, in the families' homes, and working and meeting with them. Our Healthy Families staff are one of the central components to how we achieve our 2-gen work. And certainly anybody who has any further questions about that can contact any of us offline, and we can tell you more about how we do it. I want to thank our wonderful panel, and you guys have just offered some very insightful remarks and information. And we're looking very forward to the next panel, where we'll learn more insightful information regarding what is going on in this very active legislature, and particularly so when we've had a change in administrations and all kinds of things are happening very differently than they have in the past. So I'll turn it over to our esteemed leader, Ms. Nancy Vincent, to make our transition. Thank you, everybody, for your attention.
Yes, and I want to second the thanks. And Ben, if you're going to call me esteemed, make sure that my husband is in the room.
You got it.
So we're going to take a very quick break, and at noon we will have our speakers who are going to be giving us our legislative update, and we know there's a lot going on this year. So I look forward to seeing you all back in about 3 minutes.
Hey, Nancy, it's Katie. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, great. So, hey, and I just wanted to confirm with Ripple that he's got the slides that Janet sent this morning.
Yes, I do have the slides and it's ready to go.
You are awesome. Thank you so much. I'm gonna let you drive, okay?
Sure.
You're the
Katie,
best.
do you want me to manage the chat, or do you think you and Janet
Oh
want to
yeah,
do
no,
it, or
that
how
would
do
be
you want to?
great. Yeah, because I've got I couldn't get my camera working on my with my computer attached to my monitor, so I'm just working off the laptop, and so yeah, I only can see a little bit of the screen, so that would be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, just kind of give me say, hey, is there any questions, or just give me the clue
Yeah,
that you want me to read to you.
awesome. And you can just, I mean, this can be kind of conversational, so you can jump in and interrupt us. Janet is with me here too. I'm gonna angle the camera here.
Y'all are both on the beach. What's up with that?
I
I
know,
thought
right?
you were working really hard in Richmond. I think you might be
Yeah,
alive.
we wish we were at a beach.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
You sure you have room? Because I can move this whole thing.
I got it. Yeah.
Are you sure? Look, this whole thing can be picked up.
Don't do that.
Oh, okay. Well, I can't drop it.
What if they fell? That would be horrible.
Well, I don't. Yeah, I don't want to drop it on you. Yeah.
No, I don't care about dropping on me. I don't want your files to get messed up. It's like you got them all nice and neat. My stuff is like all over my.
I stole this when Chris McDonald left. I took this from his office. It's like looting his office.
Oh my goodness.
Just know we can hear you, so
Yeah, it's okay. We're laughing.
We may have to do a citizen's arrest, Katie, for you stealing
For
stuff.
looting, yeah. Had a coworker take another job, and he had a very nice file sorter that was up for grabs, so it made it to my desk.
That's the nonprofit world.
All right, so it's noon. So let's get started with the next session. We are very, very happy to have Janet Arison, who is the Director of Policy Development for the Virginia Municipal League, and Katie Boyle, who is Director of Government Affairs for the Virginia Association of Counties, and they are both together. So let me turn it over to Janet and Katie.
Okay, it's so good to see you guys, at least virtually. And we're going to run through, Katie had done all the work on this one, putting together this wonderful slideshow that will give you a real good, like perspective of what's going on, what's alive, and just what's going on with the session. So we can go to the first slide, or the next one, I guess. And just some key dates for the session, and we've got crossover coming up next week, and that's when each body has to finish work on their bills and then they swap. And then on that Sunday, the 20th, that's a big day. That's when both the House and Senate budget writing committees report their budgets out, and you can watch that online, which is a great way to do it if you have nothing else to do that afternoon. And by that Tuesday, they will submit for everyone to see the full budget proposals, because what you only see on the Sunday is kind of a highlights kind of presentation by the committees. And the real information comes out on the Tuesday, on the 22nd, where you see all of the budget amendments that they've included in their budgets. So that's an important day. And then later that week, each house or each chamber has to complete their work on the budget. And then they swap and they will reject each other's budgets. And then they will appoint conferees to work on a compromise budget. And the March 7th is the deadline for committee action on legislation. March 12th is the scheduled adjournment of the General Assembly, and then April 27th is the reconvene session where they come back after the governor's office and AG's office have all gone through bills and all to see if there are any amendments to things that they want to submit to the General Assembly. So that's really what's coming up. So next slide, yay.
Yeah. So just wanted to give you, in addition to kind of the context of where we are sort of in the process, which, you know, today is day 30, not that we're counting, but just to kind of give you a sense of some of the big topics under discussion. And so I think the big kind of overarching issue with this session is the state's coffers are very flush. We've had very strong revenue growth, somewhat unexpected. I think in 2020, they had gone through, after the General Assembly adjourned, they came back in April and froze a lot of new spending because of the pandemic. And so things have bounced back, I think, much better than expected. And so when you sort of look at kind of where you are with what they call the caboose budget, which is the tail end of the current fiscal year, and then the biennium budget looking ahead to the next 2 years, there is, you know, $12-13 billion available over the base budget from the previous biennium. So in some ways it's great because, I mean, in a lot of ways it's great because there's a lot of resources available to meet needs that have gone unmet for many years. In some ways it's challenging because there's a lot of different approaches about what to do with that money. And I think you're going to hearing a strong preference from the new administration that money should go back to the taxpayers. You're hearing from some members of the legislature that it's time to reinvest in some things that have gone underinvested in for a long time. So, you know, there's a long way to go. You know, the money committees are sort of working now to put their budgets together in advance of the 20th, but I don't know how much they've even really started to put pen to paper. So, you know, we could be in for a pretty protracted negotiations. But if you go to the next slide, can just talk about kind of some of the big picture questions that are on the table here. So in the outgoing governor's budget, there were a series of tax proposals. Just to kind of talk briefly about some ones that are, you know, of particular interest to us. The one-time refund is sort of, I think, is something that probably will go through in one form or another. I think they're kind of going to negotiate about the level of that refund. But of big interest to us, and is actually going to be heard for the third time in the Senate Finance Committee this afternoon, is the grocery tax. And so that is. Groceries, of course, are, you know, subject to sales tax, but at a reduced rate. And so it's 2.5 cents, 1 penny that's your local option, 1 penny that's distributed to localities based on school age population, and then a 0.5 cent that goes for transportation. So we're very protective of those 2 pennies that come to localities in one way or another. And so lots of different approaches out there about what to do with that, what, you know, how much to reduce it, how to make localities whole. We have been very aggressive in saying that they've got to keep us whole one way or another. And so we will see what happens in the Senate, and then it's going to be heard again in the House tomorrow. So we'll be reporting on that. I think that will also be a budget conference sort of conversation. So there's a lot of other big picture discussions out there, I would say, in the Senate. A lot of these proposals that are kind of in the bottom of the screen there about the doubling of the standard deduction, the military retirement income tax treatment of those benefits. Those are pretty big price tag items. And I think in the Senate, there's been kind of a preference to slow some of this down and send a lot of this to a tax study committee that would work in the off season. The House is much more willing to move forward with that. So you can sort of see that we're setting up for kind of a difficult negotiation there when you get toward the end of the session and you have to actually figure out how much money you have for a budget. So if you go to the next slide, just to kind of provide a little bit of overview of some of the major items that were in the introduced budget, which becomes sort of the basis for amendment and negotiation. So this was in Governor Northam's budget in December. A strong preference for doing some big one-time things. So in addition to the required deposit that has to be made into the Revenue Stabilization Fund, there's also a $500 million voluntary deposit to the Revenue Reserve Fund, $500 million for school construction, which is something we've been advocating for over the last few years. And then also a very major investment in compensation. So 5% for SOQ recognized teacher salaries, teachers and instructional staff, and then for the state employees and state-supported local employees. Then there were also a series of kind of targeted compensation actions for the state police, the Department of Corrections, deputy sheriffs, and then of course for the direct care staff at the state hospitals. Some of that is being done through American Rescue Plan Act money in the first year, and then picking up with general fund money in the second year. So I think those were kind of like the themes of the outgoing governor's budget. But, you know, as they say, the governor proposes and the General Assembly disposes. And so there's a lot of discussion about, you know, what will be in the budgets that come out on the 20th. And a lot of that will be influenced by legislation that's under consideration. So I'm going to hand it to Janet to talk about bills and budget amendments about the Children's Services Act. So if we can go to the next slide. Thank you.
And there we go. Thanks. So a couple of bills out there on CSA this year. The two bills listed at the top as introduced were identical bills, and they would have required that your FAPT and CPMT have a parent rep who was a caregiver for a child who had received child welfare, juvenile justice, special ed, or behavioral health services. And we talked about it with the people who were promoting it, and both of the patrons ended up amending their bills, and they're still a little bit different. Barker's bill took out the requirement that the person not be a supervisor over children in a private program, and or a supervisor of people working in private programs that serve children, which I think we figured out was language that went way back in CSA's history. And things have changed, and so his bill took that out. And both bills ended up having enactment clauses added to them, and the enactment clauses ask the Office of Children's Services and specifically the State Executive Council, but we all know who's going to do the work on this, to put together, I have to read this more closely,
kind of cataloging.
Cataloging what's going on, best practices with trying to recruit parent reps, and, you know, just like the challenges of parent reps and all. And I don't think OCS was thrilled about it at first, but they were good sports about it, because it helped to kind of clear this to go through. So we think those are okay to go, and won't harm anybody. You can always, I mean, as we told the proponents of the bills, you can always go farther within your CPMT or FAPT and have parents who are actively caregivers for children that are partaking of programs, but to make it a requirement was really hard on some of the small localities in particular. So Stewart's bill, the Senate Bill 356, is a perennial bill, and I say perennial because it's been 10 years, right, that he's brought this bill forward, and it was only for Planning District 16, which is Stafford area, and it would allow them to use CSA funds for children who have been brought back from a private educational placement back to their community schools and serve them in the community. And unfortunately, it did not make it through. It was carried over because they cited the study that's going on right now that is supposed to report back in November of this year. So they were denied one more time, which is really too bad. So, and we both supported that effort for Stafford. So, okay, and the next are the budget amendments, and these are ones that that local governments worked on to get, or the first two are, the last one is not. I've put support by the first two. The first one are in the House and the Senate, and it's funding for 4 regional consultants at the Office of Children's Services to help support local CSA programs. And we really hope that those would get through. We think those would be really helpful. It was not something that OCS could bring forward as a legislative proposal on its own, or a budget request on its own, because it was too late that the recommendation was done for them to submit it. because they have a long timeline for submitting such things. The second one is about the local administrative funds from the state, which haven't been increased since 2017. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a recommendation of the work group that OCS had this last year, and we hope you all will help to support that. The last one is one that we would oppose because that would be taking the money out about the rate setting for private day special education. And as you can see, the private providers were very busy and they got a bunch of people to put the same amendment in. So anyway, so next slide and turn it over to Katie.
Yeah, so just, in the interest of time, and we'll, Ripple's got these slides and I think he'll be sharing them with you all afterwards, so that you can kind of review in more detail. So just, we'll kind of flag a couple here. And got the sort of the first bullet, the study of the kind of how the pandemic went and how we could be better prepared in the future. And so those bills are moving through. They're kind of structured a little bit differently, but it's essentially the same concept. So, and they do provide for some local government participation. So this is kind of a study of sort of how the sort of public health system functioned, and but beyond that, sort of how local government and state government kind of were able to function during the pandemic in ways that we could be better prepared in the future. And then Delegate Hodges' bill, just wanted to kind of flag that, and perhaps Secretary Hazel may have talked about that in his remarks this morning. We were running around at the session, so weren't able to hear it. But this bill is just got out of appropriations yesterday, I believe, and so this is intended to bolster the state's workforce development, and kind of elevate that within the structure of state government. And so certainly be helpful in terms of the workforce pipeline issue that I know y'all have been talking about all day. And then just wanted to kind of highlight Senate Bill 192 from Senator Mason, which is an interesting bill that was tried 2 years ago to allow to expand the pool of people who could qualify to be a local health director. So right now you've got to be a licensed physician in the state of Virginia. But of course, there's been a lot of challenges, getting people with those credentials to serve, and some health departments have had to share directors, et cetera. So this would allow folks with other public health backgrounds to qualify to hold those positions. And 2 years ago, this bill had a lot of trouble in the House. It's been amended a little this year to require that you have that medical credentialed person available to provide, excuse me, some of the functions that you need a doctor to offer. And so I think that satisfied the medical society. And so that bill is moving through, and we'll sort of see what happens in the House on that one. But the senator also has a study of the overall kind of public health system as a direction to the Joint Commission on Healthcare. So I imagine that issue may also be discussed in that venue as well. So if we could flip to the next slide, just touch briefly on a few things in the introduced budget. Sort of dealing with health. The first bullet, just wanted to kind of flag that because, as you may remember, there was a kind of an updating last year of the funding formula for the cooperative health budget, which had not been updated since I think the 60s.
Yeah.
It had been a very long time, and so to avoid too much of a shock to the system, because there were sort of winners and losers. Some jurisdictions match rate changed, and some went up, and some went down. And so to kind of smooth out the impact of that, they phase it in every 3 years. So with the fiscal 22 being the first year of that change, and then the next 2 years sort of over the biennium. And so a lot of this is sort of impact to the state, by the state having to pick up more of the share for a number of jurisdictions. So that process is continuing, and there was language in the budget in last year, which I believe is retained in this year, about having a more frequent, might even have been codified last year as well, to have a more frequent updating of those match rates so that you don't have this huge adjustment, decades down the road. So I think we'll expect to see some more of that, more incremental changes going forward in future budgets. And then just wanted to flag the funding for the Virginia Health Workforce Development Authority. And this is sort of front loaded in the biennium to fund a work group to study primary care workforce issues and looking at potential solutions to include loan forgiveness. So we will see, this was in the introduced budget. And so we will see if that makes it all the way through. I haven't seen any amendments to take it out, but and so that I think kind of covers, I know this is a very high level, very broad brush. There's a lot of things in the budget and we just kind of picked out a few of particular interest, but I think that gives you a flavor of sort of the health arena. And I could pause there and just see if there's any questions in the chat, or we can plow ahead and take questions at the end.
I don't see any questions yet, so.
Okay,
Okay.
that sounds great.
Let's keep on going.
Okay, we'll turn it over and I'll let Janet, is going to talk about some behavioral health bills.
Lots and lots of those this year, as you can imagine. So first is a real good bill, House Bill 105 from Delegate Rasool from the Roanoke area, and it is now a substitute, but it directs the State Department of General Services in cooperation with Behavioral Health Department to study the feasibility of transforming Catawba Hospital, which is out in the Roanoke area, into a facility with a continuum of care for both substance abuse treatment and recovery services, and including long-term, short-term, acute, and outpatient services, and also an array of behavioral health and other services currently provided for older Virginians that have mental health challenges. And it got a lot of support in all the committees it went through, and it's now on the House floor. Real good bill. Let's see. The next bills are twin provisions that would bar a provider of treatment for persons with opiate addiction from right now. There's a prohibition that you can't be located within a half-mile of a public or private licensed daycare or public or private K-12 school, and that would take out that prohibition. Because in some areas they have a hard time being able to locate at all without being within that half-mile limit. So those measures are moving through. You still have to be notified. I think the commissioner has to notify you that they're going to be your local government, that they're there to be, that they're going to be put in, or they've applied for a permit to go in. And so it's not like there's not notification to the local government. So. And then this morning, Katie and I were in House Public Safety on House Bill 1191, which has to do with the Marcus Alert legislation that was passed in the special session in 2020. And this bill was amended this morning. And it now, before it would have allowed anybody to opt out of the Marcus Alert, and meaning any local government to opt out, and it was amended. And it now includes a 1-year delay for localities with populations greater than 40,000 and 2 years for those smaller than 40,000 population. It also has some new reporting requirements that we think are really helpful to kind of get a better handle on what's really going on out there in localities with trying to implement this program in their planning processes and all. And the changes that were brought forward really by the Department of Behavioral Health because they're having a heck of a time dealing with this implementation of this program, very ambitious program themselves. So it was reported favorably out of subcommittee, and I expect it will be the same thing will happen with the full committee and on through. Now on the Senate side, there's Senate Bill 361, and that one has passed the Senate and will be coming over to the House. But that one just has that there's an opt-out if you're 40,000 or less in population, that you can opt out of the program completely. So if these bills pass the way, in these ways, these bills will have to go into conference to be figured out how they want to do this. The last one on that page, 1341, it ended up being tabled by the patron with a letter to the Behavioral Health Commission, and had some problems about, well, it's first started out as anybody with a developmental disability who came into a local regional jail, that you would have to assess everybody, one, to see if they had a developmental disability, if you thought they did, and there is no screening tool that is out there right now, and two, if they were screened positive for that they would have to be further assessed, and then the CSB would have to come and take them and refer them to a facility, which is like, okay, where's that going to be? Anyway, so I think the patron, she did amend her bill to take out developmental disabilities, just include SMI instead. That was still an issue because of just how do you take somebody out of a jail and put them in a facility when there are no beds? So it was kind of unworkable. So that got tabled with a letter to the Behavioral Health Commission, which is a good place for it to be examined. Next page is, yeah.
Yeah, and so I know we're running short on time, so I'll just wanted to flag the bill in the middle here, which has to do with mental health parity, and I know something that is dear to the hearts of. Yeah, that's right. This one's for you, Leslie. So yeah, and this bill seems to be sailing along. It's it provides some additional reporting requirements for the Bureau of Insurance to kind of document more of their oversight about mental health parity with respect to the health plans. So it seems to be a good bill and is moving forward. So if we can hop to the next slide. So just wanted to touch on these bills. There originally were a whole slew of bills about emergency custody orders and temporary detention orders, and largely introduced sort of at the request of law enforcement, who, as you know, have been struggling with the closures of the state hospitals. I think they're all intended to be helpful. Certainly, I think admittedly, they're only kind of addressing one part of this whole continuum of issues surrounding, not enough beds, not enough community services, et cetera. But they are kind of intended to relieve some of the stresses on law enforcement. So initially there were quite a few bills out there. They've been sort of folded into each other. And then interestingly, in the House Appropriations Committee has tabled several of them due to cost, but the first one, Delegate Bell's bill that is moving along, although I think it's gotten sent back to committee for a further amendment, but this is intended to allow employees or contractors for DBHDS to be able to come and do the transportation rather than law enforcement. So helpful bill. Senator Newman, Senate Bill 202, is a work group about increasing the use of alternative custody arrangements. That one seems to be not controversial and is sailing along. Senate Bill 268, Favola, incorporates 4 or 5 bills that were introduced kind of on a similar subject. And the twist here with hers is, she is trying to make alternative transportation kind of the default for the magistrate or the court to order when they're issuing an emergency custody order or a temporary detention order, so that they would sort of consider all options for alternative transportation. And if alternative transportation wasn't feasible, then they would go to law enforcement. She's got the same language about allowing DBHDS employees or contractors to provide alternative transportation. And then a number of bills have had these provisions about allowing the transfer of custody to the alternative transportation provider. So in other words, the law enforcement, upon the execution of the ECO or TDO, could hand the person over to the alternative transportation provider, and then law enforcement would go about their other duties. And then Senator Favola's bill also has some language, which I think is going to be the sticking point for a lot of these bills, which is directing the department to amend its contract for alternative transportation to ensure that people can provide this service. And I think the issue in appropriations, I think, has been the funding for this contract. There is funding in the introduced budget to fund the remaining need in the alternative transportation contract to allow 24/7 coverage, but not necessarily to cover the alternative transportation provider sort of sitting with someone at a hospital and that kind of thing. And so the cost issue may be the factor that stops those bills from moving forward. And then Senator Newman has a somewhat similar bill in terms of the alternative, the transfer of custody, but he would allow auxiliary police officers who go through a certain amount of training to do the transportation as well. So, maybe I'll pause there because I know we're sort of running short on time and see if there's any questions. We've got some more slides, but they can be kind of a takeaway. Unless there's something you want to
No, that was perfect.
make sure to touch on.
And I don't see any questions in the chat.
Okay, well, we can touch on just a couple things in the introduced budget on behavioral health. There was this was an area where the outgoing governor put quite a bit of money, just to kind of flag, in addition to the compensation actions that I talked about earlier, they also he also included funding for the overtime costs, $9 million in the caboose budget to cover the temporary staffing contracts for a little bit more time. There's also the sort of midway down the page bullet about the Department of Behavioral Health being directed to create a plan for alternative custody. And there's some money set aside in the second year to implement the plan's recommendations there. So I think a lot of these bills that have to do with emergency custody orders, temporary detention orders may end up being worked on in that study, and then there's some money set aside, or alternatively they could pull that money into the first year of the biennium and try to do something this year. So we'll kind of be watching that. That's I think an evolving issue there. So yeah, a lot of smaller items on the rest of that slide, and then on the next slide, just to touch on, there's quite a bit in here for crisis services to include ARPA funds. There's the remaining 3 services being rolled out for STEP Virginia. An interesting item is that they're directing a comprehensive study of the state and local behavioral health care system and funding that at $1 million in the first year, and then setting aside $100 million in the second year to fund whatever the recommendations of that study. So that's, I think, a lever in the budget that could potentially be repurposed for other uses, or perhaps it stays where it is. So, just another example of sort of things that may need to be worked out in conference. And then just quickly on the next slide, a couple of member budget amendments that we're supportive of. The first one is the big request from the Virginia Association of Community Services Boards. They wanted to kind of focus their energies on the CSB workforce. And so I think some of this has to do with recruitment and retention bonuses. I think I believe they're also contemplating sort of paying for supervision for folks getting their licensure. So it's a large request, but I think their feeling is that actions have been taken to help with the state hospitals, and so you also need to be bolstering the community part of the system as well. We have historically supported additional funding for the Part C early intervention, and then there's more funding to enhance the funding levels for the Marcus Alert and for the CSBs in Region 2, which we are supportive of fully funding that. That was one of the reasons we offered this morning in terms of the delay was that we'd like to see if the amount of money that the state has allocated thus far is really sufficient. I think we expect that it's not, but it would be nice to be able to kind of document that. And then there's a proposal to use both some general fund money and some ARPA money to enhance crisis or CTACs or crisis stabilization units and sort of move those more towards crisis receiving centers, which we are supportive of as well. It was a request of Arlington County, but I think their intention is that it could have statewide application. So I think that runs us up against the lunch break. So I know this was very quick. There's a lot of things going on. And so we thought the slides might just help you kind of review. And we, I'm sure, are certainly happy to take questions that people come up with afterwards. And I think we can share our email addresses in the chat. But happy to take any questions now as well.
Well, thank you so much, Katie and Janet, for this this really rapid, great information, high level information, stuff that we need to know with so much going on. This is really, really helpful. I appreciate your taking the time to do this for us.
Our pleasure.
And we will certainly put the slides on the website. And so they'll be available to everybody from going directly to the website. So we're going to take a short half-hour lunch, and in fact, a little bit less than half hour, because we were very fortunate to be joined by Secretary Littell at 1. He only has a few minutes to spend with us. So if he's on, I'm probably going to introduce him at 12:59 so he can start right at 1 and get right into his presentation. So enjoy your lunch, and we will see everybody back at 1 o'clock.
Thanks, Katie and Janet. You guys
Thank you.
rock, as
Aw.
always. And I was glad that you used the word mental health parity. That made me happy.
Absolutely. We know it's dear to your heart.
I know.
Yeah, that bill kind of got watered down a little bit. But it's at least progress, right?
Hey, it's Rebecca. I have a question, but I didn't want to ask it in the group because it could just be my not knowing. Was there any kind of budget amendment for child welfare stipend that was
Yes. Yep.
happened?
Yeah, and it's oh yeah, I keep forgetting you guys don't have these slides with you right now, but we'll send it. Senator Mason put one in. So it's adding slots. So it's 180,000 in the first year in general fund and 360 in the second year, and then there's kind of matching non-general funds. So
Okay.
yeah, which is a good. I mean, we support that. I had that on my list for the members to support when they were here for Lobby Day.
Awesome.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that would help potentially with some of our workforce to get people not just focused on foster care,
Yeah.
but the CPS type training.
Yep. So he always makes a compelling case. It's just a matter of getting it, to the money committees. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and I
know.
think now's really the time. I should have said this in our presentation, but they're really working on their budgets like now. So I mean, I think a letter or a contact to your legislators would be really timely. So
Well, fortunately, mine are the ones that support all these things, but
yeah, well, I think it doesn't hurt to kind of, remind them of your support so that they can buttonhole their colleagues.
yeah, I need to do that on the House for several things, I think.
Yeah, and I think, probably the league will do some kind of budget letter, right, to the money committees. So, yeah. Yep. All right, well, it's nice to see you all.
Yeah. Y'all have a good lunch.
Hello, Molly. It's Leslie.
Hey, Leslie, how are you?
I'm good.
Are you guys on lunch break?
Yeah, and folks are getting ready, coming back at 1, and then the new Health and Human Services Secretary is gonna have some he's gonna talk, and then we're gonna go into your session.
Okay, that sounds great.
Do you need anything? Are you pretty much set up the way I think you and Ripple talked?
We did. The only thing I had forgotten to do was to get you all the behavioral guide that goes along. And so I emailed him a little while ago and texted to see is that still possible, like if we put it in the chat or something that people
Yeah.
to refer to it.
Yep, we can definitely put it in the chat.
Okay. Sorry about that. I just.
No worries. You got a lot of balls in the air. Not a problem.
How's the conference going, Leslie? Is it going good?
It's going well. I think it's going well. Just think we're all in this together when it comes to the workforce thing. So it's good to, to just spend some time talking about it, different parts of it.
Yeah.
I wish it was not virtual, but other than that.
Do the best you can with what you have, right?
Yep.
Well, I was just going to kind of hang out, and if Ripple was a little early, I would just check in with him because I did decide not to do quite as many breakouts for the sake of time. So,
okay.
So I'm just going to hang out with my stuff muted, and hopefully y'all see him, and he and I can chat just for a minute, and then, or if not, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, he should be getting back on. So.
Okay. That's awesome. Thanks, Leslie.
Hello, everyone. We are waiting for Secretary Littell to join us. So give us a couple of more minutes, and as soon as he's on the meeting, I will let everyone know, and we can hear from him.
Hi, Nancy. Great conference so far, everyone.
Thank you. So far, so good. Hopefully we'll hear from the secretary soon.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. It sounds like we have the secretary on via phone.
You do. I apologize. I am out of the office and I tried to get on this and I do not have the Teams function on my phone, so I'm trying to upload it. But I figured it's going to take a while, so I better get on by phone.
Thank you so much. This is perfectly fine. So let me go ahead and introduce you. I'll introduce our new Secretary of Health and Human Resources, John Littell. And just to let all the folks know that Secretary Littell is a graduate of the University of Scranton and of Catholic University School of Law. He has served as the president of Magellan of Virginia and Chief External Affairs Officer for Magellan Health. And prior to joining Magellan, he served as Executive Vice President for External Affairs at Amerigroup Corporation. While there, he launched the National Advisory Board for People with Disabilities. He then served as an interim Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for Anthem. Previously, he has served at the federal and state government levels, including as the Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Resources and Director of Intergovernmental Affairs for the White House Office of National Drug Policy. He serves as chair of the Virginia Healthcare Foundation and on the board of the Gloucester Institute, a leadership initiative for young African Americans. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Secretary Littell.
Well, thank you. You reminded me that I have to update my biography because I'm not doing any of those things anymore, I think. But thank you. I'm sorry I can't be with you by video. I'm actually out of Richmond today. I'm finishing up. I've served 10 years on the board at William & Mary and have been the rector here. So this is my second to last meeting. And so I have two rooms here. One is the boardroom where we're having our meetings, and then the other one is I keep running back to be the secretary. So a little confusing. So hopefully I don't talk to you about higher ed now, but I really appreciate it. I understand you guys are having a virtual meeting. I think we're all looking forward to being back together in person. But it also does allow us to meet this way. And I do want to just thank you.
If you have time, I'll see you at finance later.
Yes. Okay, that sounds great.
Thank you for the work that you all do. I know, as hard as my job is, you guys are much closer to the action, and yours is often more difficult. And a lot of the situations that we deal with that are statistics are real life stories for you all. So thank you for that. I'll just tell you, we're in sort of, this is week 3.5. It feels like 3 months. When people say I did something last week, I really really think it was about a month ago. In the midst of all this, I also had COVID. So every day I get 1 to 3 hours that I spend on COVID, either with the health department, the governor, or other people. So it was especially nice to actually be working from home while I had COVID, talking about COVID. But I'm sure many of you have been dealing with the same thing. And, you know, the good news on that is, you know, we are seeing today, now we believe every part of the state is seeing significant declines in positivity, you know, either a stabilization or reduction in hospital admissions, more discharges. You know, we're not tracking any additional strains at this point. So, and again, you know, where you sit is a little different. You know, Northern Virginia, Eastern Virginia, really in much better shape. Western part of the state, particularly the Southwest, still kind of hard there. But I think lots of improvements. We're seeing a lot more tests that are available. We have some therapeutics that are flowing, I think, better. All those are controlled by the federal government, but we're getting a better sense of what we're going to get each week on that. So I think there's some I don't want to get to light at the end of the tunnel, but I think we're starting to see you know, some improvement across the board there. For me, a lot of the issues, it should be no surprise to you, like where I am right now, it changes a little every day. But you know, the first sort of issue that the governor asked me to focus on, and one of the few things that he campaigned on the health and human resource side, is mental health. And you know, just looking at that situation and you know, how we approach it, I would much rather be talking about sort of across the board, what I would just call the continuum of care, whether that's public, private, or whatever. But the reality is, you know, we have some bleeding in our hospitals, and you know, we have to really get to that point. We have obviously custody issues with a lot of sheriffs and other law enforcement that are spending too much time on this. We have too few private hospital beds, and too little local service that are available. So, you know, those are all things we're not going to solve immediately, and it's not to suggest the administration was not working on that path as well. But you know, that clearly is an area that we're going to stay focused on. There's a lot of things that are going on in the General Assembly that address that. They're certainly not silver bullets. They're not going to fix large parts of it, but they may be helpful. I think underlying all those things, and I know you feel it even in your own teams, you know, we already had a workforce crisis in healthcare prior to pandemic. It's just gotten significantly worse. It's especially true in behavioral health. You know, you all know this, but we have counties with very little, sometimes zero behavioral health resources. We've got 35 counties that don't have any trained BH prescribers. We just, you know, we have too few on the private sector, public sector. The pipeline for those individuals, whether they're nurses, doctors, social workers, psychiatrists, it's just not as robust as it needs to be. So, you know, some of that is incentive, some of that is pipeline, some of it is, you know, creating retention things. I think, you know, that's going to be significantly worse because, you know, under COVID, I believe a lot of people in the system are just going to, you know, are exhibiting, you know, post-traumatic stress, and you know, the implications of that. I mean, I've met social workers and nurse practitioners who have left the field to work at Wawa because it's less stressful. We have a lot of people in the healthcare system that have, you know, we think as a layperson, we always think, you know, doctors are experienced with death and dying, but many people in healthcare are not, and they have, and I think that's going to, you know, create even more of a stress and burden for them. So that's clear. You know, alongside that is, you know, the opioid crisis, which again, you guys know firsthand. It did not go away during COVID. It certainly wasn't a headline issue, but we still have that, and other drugs and drug overdose issues that we have to focus on. The one area I wish I had thought about when the governor asked me to consider this job, and I must have had some mental block and pushed it out of my system, is I had forgotten how many system issues, IT systems, that I was responsible for, and just sort of working through all those. Our social services system needs to be replaced. That's something that you all have to deal with as well. Our Medicaid system needs an upgrade. The Medicaid and the DSS systems don't always work closely or well together. We do very little auto redetermination. So lots and lots of stuff there. Our contact center's not doing what it needs to be doing. And then of course, we have this issue of Medicaid redetermination and all the people that joined the rolls during the pandemic, of making sure that they're in the right place, whether it's base Medicaid or Medicaid expansion. So those are kind of the issues that I'm focused on this week. And so, I had a different perspective before I started working here as to what my priorities would be. But as you know, the stuff that we deal with, rarely a day goes by that there's not some kind of crisis, and that crisis, will drive the agenda sometimes. So those are some kind of high level things about where I am. I am also really excited. I think there's a lot of energy. It seems, for me, I've had incredible opportunities to talk to legislators and local leaders. Our issues are not really partisan. There's been great bipartisan work on this. Not always perfect solutions, but I think there's a lot of willingness everybody wants to be involved and be part of the solution. So I am very positive about that. The governor is really interested in, rolling up his sleeves and getting in deep in this. When I talked to I said, a lot of these things are just not sexy. Governors don't like to get deep in them. You got to do there's a lot of technical stuff. And so far he seems to really like it. And he actually is probably ahead of me on some issues. So I have to stay up even later to read things in advance of any meetings with him. But I think that'll be, really positive. So that's kind of where I am right now. I'm sorry to preached for a while. I would be happy to answer questions if that's possible in this format.
So does anybody have any questions for the secretary? Any thoughts?
Or anything that's on your list that I just didn't touch on that I should be focused on.
Okay, let's see here. We have a comment that we appreciate your support of systems upgrades for the Social Security systems. Anything else that we should be focusing or communicating? Okay, well, Secretary Littell, it was so kind of you to take some time to join us for this meeting. We have lots going on, and I'm sure we'll be in touch. You'll probably hear from quite a few of the directors